All right, welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we welcome back Nigel Cameron. He's a historian and ethicist. He's the author of the book, Dr. Koop, The Many Lives of the Surgeon General. We're going to talk about an excerpt from that book today on Kevin MD, how drkoop.com rose and fell, the untold story behind the Surgeon General's startup. Nigel, welcome back to the show.
Great to be here, Kevin.
All right. What's this particular excerpt about?
Yeah, Koop stepped down as Surgeon General in '89, but he wasn't done. He was just getting moving, and he had all kinds of projects. And one of them, which could have been the biggest of all, was to set up the top healthcare site on the internet, working with a bunch of other guys who were more business-minded than he was. And briefly, it was incredible. And then, well, it was a bad time to be doing this. This was the late 1990s, 2000, dot-com boom, dot-com bust, and he was riding that wave.
So we're talking about the late 1900s, early 2000s, and there weren't very many health sites on the web. So maybe he was a little bit ahead of his time, right? drkoop.com and having a site with reliable healthcare information. Back then, it was something that was pioneering, right?
Well, it was. And in fact, the original project that these business guys put to him and he got involved with was much more modest. It was about enabling people to have their own medical records on their own home computers, because the internet was pretty young then. There wasn't a lot of bandwidth and so on. So originally, the company, founded, I don't know, in mid 90s, was called Personal Medical Records, Inc.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so you could have your records on your PC, which of course we know is difficult enough anyway, but that was what they were trying to do. Then they came up with this web-based strategy, and they cleverly decided to use the brand drkoop.com. I think it's the Wall Street Journal who said that their basic play was to use the name of the feisty Dr. Koop to give the whole thing credibility and make it stand out from other nascent websites. Pretty good idea.
So what happened? Because I remember this was around the time that I was in residency in the early 2000s, and I think even I heard of drkoop.com. So how big did it initially get?
They got big. I mean, they had an IPO and they raised, I think, 80 or 90 million, in the marketplace. At one point, Koop's share was worth well over 100 million
Wow.
nominally. And it seemed to be going very well. I mean, Bear Stearns did the IPO. They were known for being a pretty much out there, gung ho, a merchant bank, but they did it and it floated fine. And they began doing deals with AOL and with other players in the web marketplace. And there were criticisms of what the managers did. A guy called Donald Hackett, whom I've spoken to and be very helpful with my book. I mean, he was candid about this. I mean, they had business challenges because this was a novel thing. But what they had was this incredible, best known and most trusted doc in the world, the English speaking world, chairing the board and using his actual name for the product. And so they really had a lot going for them, but it didn't actually go very well. And whereas a lot of companies are going up and down, dot-com boom, dot-com bust, there were some special factors here that can be a bit embarrassing.
So at its heyday, at the height of its popularity, what exactly was drkoop.com? So if you went to that website, what exactly were you getting?
Oh, well, I had a ton of stuff. I mean, they had very early sort of, kind of discussion groups, there were all sorts of things. You could ask people questions. They would have, 20 reasons why you shouldn't drink and drive. But I mean, there was also a lot of interactive stuff going on. The things that got embarrassing were they had, for example, a list of the, I don't know, maybe 10 top hospitals in the US. And someone discovered that these are hospitals who were paying, I don't know, 10, 15 grand to advertise. At that time, there was very little sort of agreement about how you deal with editorial versus advertising on commercial websites. This was pretty early days. It was a bit of Wild West. And when that criticism came, Koop responded very interestingly. I mean, he was thinking strategically, and he said, well, let's get together all the other websites doing this kind of stuff. And let's come up with some terms of reference, with some protocols. And they came up with a statement called high ethics, which is healthcare internet ethics,
Mm-hmm.
saying that they would notify, they would specify this is advertising, this is editorial. So, but by then, that the word about this little sort of scandalous association had gone on, and the press were jumping on him because this guy was so well thought of. He was a superb target for a journalist with a pen who really wanted to have some fun. And the other real issue with the website was that they discovered he was getting commission
Hmm.
on everything sold through the site, and they were selling various sort of medical apparatus and so on and so forth. Now, that doesn't seem unreasonable, but it wasn't declared. And so these twin particular criticisms, I mean, Koop had this incredible image. And the more incredible your image, the higher they fly, the further they fall.
Hmm.
And so I think it was Boston paper that they had this list of winners and losers at the end of every year. And on Koop, they said, he's lost his chance of sainthood because of this criticism. Another problem with the whole thing was he tried to do everything. I think at one point a journalist said he was in his office, or one of his offices. At one point he had five offices in 5 states. This
Hmm.
guy's in his 80s. And there were 35 no's on an org chart on the wall. So, the day the IPO launched and they pulled in this 87 million or whatever it was, Koop wasn't, sort of hunkered down at the offices in, I think, Austin, Texas with the guys for 3 or 4 days. No, no, no. He was going to other meetings on other projects. He had this plan for a medical museum on the mall. That was the evening of that day, and so on. And so the people around the company didn't see very much of him. And this was a big strategic mistake on his part. But on the other hand, the market was going up and down. So I think he did it's in my book, I think he did some things for which he really could be blamed. I wouldn't think he could be blamed too much, but it was a fiasco. And the tragedy is, I mean, you go now to drkoop.com. I mean, it's still there.
Hmm.
Because when the company went belly up in 2001, they had a fire sale. I mean, what you do when you're bankrupt, they lost over 200 million. What could they sell? They sold the site, and the name of the site and the mailing list, I think it was 183,000. Koop apparently never thought of buying it. He must really, really wish he had. He probably thought it was worth a lot more money than that. And so you can go on there now, drkoop.com. It's just a sort of, as a wormhole into, life in the 1990s. It's still there. And the site, they sell vitamins and all kinds of that sort of stuff. At the bottom of every single page, it says, drkoop.com has no relation to Dr. C. Everett Koop, former Surgeon General, which is a kind of, I mean, this is round the poor guy's neck forever. Because, of course, it does have a relationship to him. That's why it's there.
Yeah.
It's a legal nicety, in a sense, just made the whole thing so much worse.
So during the heyday of drkoop.com, it sounded like Koop had a big hand in terms of the day-to-day operations, strategic direction, editorial control. Like, how involved was he?
I think his involvement was episodic.
Okay.
So somebody who worked on their team said that every month or two, he would fly in. And he'd have security guys with him. And when he flew into their offices, they would have these top-end security guys screening the office, with all these devices in case there were bugs and cameras and this and that. So it was a huge sort of to-do because nobody wanted his secrets and all that sort of stuff to get out there. And I don't think he was ever on top of the project. I mean, chaired the board. One of his good friends and long-term colleagues, Admiral Edward Martin, who was his chief of staff at one point, refused to join the board. He was asked to join the board and refused to do it. He said, these guys, they're not quite the guys you want to work with. That may be unfair, but they weren't, let's just say they weren't sort of the top people in the world doing this kind of thing. They were entrepreneurs. Don Hackett had a good reputation working on IT stuff. Koop was never on top of the project. And he made a very odd comment when the whole thing began to fall apart. He told an interviewer, well, if I could do it again, I wouldn't let them use my name.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Chick Koop was a brilliant man, and he was a friend of mine, but he was a very naive man in some ways. It plainly had never occurred to him that the whole point of the site was, as the Wall Street Journal put it, the feisty name of Dr. Koop, because he had this great sort of street cred. And without his name, they wouldn't have done the project. But he regretted it, and lots of bad publicity and blame and so on. And he was depressed in his final years for more personal reasons, but this took a hit, and he really had the sense that his sterling reputation was being damaged in this process. But for a few months, it was a top medical site on the web.
Do you feel that he had regret, and if he had to do it all over again, he wouldn't have?
I think I think if he had to do it again, I think he might have listened to some of his friends and colleagues, like Ed Martin, April Martin, and worked out how to improve the project, how to make it less risky, how to risk his name less sort of flagrantly. I think he would have been persuaded that he needed to use his name because that was what distinguished this site from various other sites that were getting going. And it might have succeeded. In fact, one of the sort of obituaries, there were various obituaries in Fortune and other publications, and one of the obituaries basically said, "Well, this really could have worked." And had it not been at the sort of dot-com boom and burst thing, and had it been a year or two earlier, perhaps, or even a year or two later, or had there been some slightly different decisions taken, it could have worked, and it still could have been the world's top medical website. And I mean, Koop left office committed to, before anything else, to medical communication, to information, to helping people with their health, to being a kind of eternal Surgeon General, outside of government, and finding all sorts of ways to deliver health messages. And this, of course, would be the best of all. I mean, I wish he'd dropped everything and done it, rather than have the other 34 nodes, all these different projects he was involved with. He was far too committed. It's a tragic situation, and I feel very sorry for him, sort of the old guy, as he realized what was going on here, because every time he went on the web, if he looked at drkoop.com, it was still there as a kind of a haunting, a sort of shadow of what he wanted to do. And he's hawking, medical vitamins, and I mean, tobacco, smoking cures, and some of the things actually, weight cures. I mean, some stuff was in line with what he was trying to do. But basically, it was a sort of commercial operation that he had no control over. But bizarrely, for legal reasons, on every page, I had to point out, reminding people who he was. So it must have been a pretty nasty thing, and it's still there.
So it almost sounds like a missed opportunity, because this could have been an enduring memorial to what he believed in and who C. Everett Koop was as a person. I just think, as I said earlier, maybe he was just ahead of his time and he didn't receive the proper business advice, didn't have the right team around him to kind of steer him in the right direction. Because having a reputable website backed by the name of the Surgeon General in the early 2000s could have been quite pioneering for its time.
I think it was a missed opportunity. I think done slightly differently, it could have been really very important, because he was deeply committed to science, to integrity and honesty in science. He would never do anything for a quick buck. I mean, he wouldn't mind making money, but I mean, he was very serious in what he did, and it would have provided a site which could have been the go-to place for medical information. I mean, something else worth mentioning is that his interest really was in communicating medical information. Earlier on, there'd been a disaster with Time Life, because Time Life, I mean, absolute top brand in communication. They launched a series of videos, which Koop sort of had a key role in, and the whole thing failed. So you think he might have learned that you don't just listen to the business guys, and found some way to give more sort of stability to this project, and to focus more time on it. But he really had this deep commitment to information and to giving people, I mean, free of charge, I mean, healthcare information. And on the site, I mean, they developed communities. There were actual discussions. This was pretty early on for sort of chat and so on and so forth. And it was leading edge. And the fact that the whole thing went down, I mean, the site lost 200 million. Koop made about $1 million out of it. You can make what you will of that. I mean, I've discovered all this. It's all in the book. And he persisted in his efforts to use technology. And what most people don't know is that during the Clinton-Gore administration, but of course, Al Gore inventing the internet, all that sort of humor, Koop was very much involved with Al Gore in developing projects to use the internet to link healthcare companies and practitioners and so on. There were a whole, he got 2 major grants in the Clinton administration, which got no publicity at all, to build infrastructure based, I mean, healthcare, we now call it bioinformatics, but that wasn't the term they were using back then. So it wasn't just this sort of top level, I'm the big guy. He got quite seriously involved. And somebody who worked with him at Dartmouth College, which is where he was then based, who who was big guru on bioinformatics stuff, he said he really understood. He wasn't a technical guy, but he really understood the significance of these technologies in building communication. And so I think if he had focused and brought together people to focus on the big one, drkoop.com, maybe it will still be there.
We're talking to Nigel Cameron, author of the book, Dr. Koop, The Many Lives of the Surgeon General. We're talking about an excerpt from that book, how drkoop.com rose and fell, the untold story behind the Surgeon General's startup. Nigel, let's end with some take-home messages that you would like to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
Well, one would be, I mean, Koop said, there's nothing more important than information. I mean, learning stuff about how to manage your health is the most important thing. And that, of course, remains true. And in his old age, he just kept repeating this message. Another is that I think if we're looking for examples, not least in our current political climate, of integrity and somebody who, could be criticized and wasn't a perfect individual, but really had fundamental commitment to being honest, to being truthful, to saying what he felt needed to be said, I think it's hard to find a better example. And so I have great admiration for Koop. If you read the book, you'll find out some of the problems with him. He had feet of clay like the rest of us do. I mean, looking back at his life, and despite the final failure of this project, for a short time, for months, perhaps for a year or so, he was the world's top healthcare communicator, using the most advanced technology platform of the day in his 80s. That's an incredible thing. And I think we can be grateful for it. And we need to read the book to find out more about him.
Nigel, thank you again for sharing your perspective and insight. Thanks again for coming back on the show.
Kevin, thanks so much. Take care.